Hello, my name is David Plyler, and I'm a music specialist and producer for concerts from the Library of Congress. This fall, we are continuing our virtual concert series with guest artists from around the world. And though we would much rather be welcoming them to the library in person, we are thankful that they have been willing to share their work with us remotely while we strive to safely navigate the ongoing pandemic. Today it is my great pleasure to speak with pianist Leif Ove Ansnes, who joins us today from Norway. Earlier this year, he prepared a wonderful recital for Spivey Hall, recorded at the beautiful Edvard Grieg Museum in Bergen, Norway. We are delighted to be able to share this concert for a brief period with our Library of Congress audience. First, welcome and thank you for speaking with me today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
I wanted to ask how you've been managing given the pandemic. Are you finding now more opportunities to play in public, or are you still somewhat limited in what you're able to do, or have things been improving for you?
Well, I have to say, right now it's really picking up in Europe. I I just finished a six concert tour in Europe with the violinist Christian Tetzlaff, and we had six concerts in 8 days in five countries, and it was very exciting because it was sort of the first time that it was as intense as that, and as as that I was as free to travel. And it seems to continue. I mean, I have more problems getting to the States. I don't seem to at the moment. It's difficult to get a visa. I'm supposed to be with New York Philharmonic in October, but we'll see. But I'm very excited that things there are still restrictions. There are places we played 2 days ago in Moscow. We could have one third of the audience there. Other places they can fill up the hall as long as people are showing they are vaccinated and so on. So there are different restrictions in different countries, but we can play for people and we can travel more freely, which is just wonderful.
That's fantastic. Um, I know that you have recordings and things come out during the pandemic. What did you find yourself weren't able to perform live?
Actually, I've been in the lucky situation. I mean, living in Norway, it hasn't been completely closed, and I was able in this 1.5 year to play quite a bit of smaller concerts. Sometimes down to 20 people in the audience, and up to 200. Never more than 200. And it's amazing how grateful one is in the end just to play for a group of people. I mean, I had some really wonderful, touching moments with smaller recitals here and there, and also to be able to work with a Norwegian orchestra, sometimes only streaming, but other times for an audience of 100 or 200. And it's been wonderful in a way to connect with the musical life of my own country, because
Mhm.
I usually travel a lot abroad, and so that hasn't been too bad for me. But I was at the same time also working on some recording projects, and one of them was these Dvorak pieces that is part of the program that you will be showing today.
Fantastic. Um, well, I know that for the audience members, must have been a great pleasure to be able to actually witness live programming. So I'm jealous of them as well as, but I'm pleased that you were able to do that. I understand that in the past you visited the Library of Congress, the music division at the Library of Congress. Is that true? And if so, what did you look at when you were there? Do you remember?
I was very happy to have a closer look at Rachmaninoff's fourth piano concerto, um, which is a special case when it comes to manuscripts because there are different versions of it. And I ended up playing the later version, which is mostly played and recorded earlier. But I was very interested in looking at the earlier versions, and at Library of Congress you have all of them, and there is much longer extended version, and there's also a sort of middle version. I can't remember exactly the years now. I mean, he ended up revising this concerto. I guess it was one of the last works he revised and worked on. Um, and he was so heavily criticized for the first performance of the first version, and one maybe thinks, oh, that might have been the reason why, because it wasn't successful. Maybe he thought, oh, I have to change things, because even geniuses like that can get uncertain of if they have what they have delivered. And but I ended up thinking that of these versions, his last revision was maybe the best. But I don't know. I mean, one day I might go back to that early one. And in any case, it was very interesting to see the process in these three versions, what he went through and what he cut out and what he changed, and making it more practical sometimes in the orchestration and between the piano and orchestra, because that's particularly difficult. One wouldn't think that it was so difficult in a Rachmaninoff concerto, but the fourth is really a complicated piece. So I wanted to look at these changes, and I was very grateful for those hours in the Library of Congress.
Oh, fantastic! I'm so glad you got to do that. Well, we definitely have an open invitation to you next time you're in Washington. Please feel free to drop by, and
Thank you.
assuming we're open.
I know you have a lot of wonderful things there, so I'd love to see more.
Sure. Well, let's look at a little bit about your program that you've prepared. And originally, you prepared it for Spivey Hall, but we're so pleased that you're allowing us to do it at the library as well. I mean, as part of our series. And so you start with the Pathetique Sonata of Beethoven. I know that in your discography, you have the Beethoven Journey project with the Concerti. But I don't believe that you've recorded many of the sonatas. I think you had Opus 110 maybe, but I'm curious, what was this going to be part of a project that you were going to do during the 250th birthday celebration that kind of got waylaid a bit, or what drew you to play Beethoven right now?
Well, it was interesting because I as you mentioned, I did a big Beethoven project in between 2012 and 2015, and which was concentrated on the piano concertos, on the 5 piano concertos, and the choral fantasy, and recording these pieces together with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra. And then when it was getting closer to 2020, I was thinking, should I do a big Beethoven project again? And I decided actually that it was a bit too early. I was in the middle of preparing a big Mozart project with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra, but then COVID changed everything, and I sat there like everybody else and was thinking, oh, maybe I should still study some Beethoven that I haven't studied. And the Pathetique Sonata, of course, it's the kind of piece that I went through as a child and played it, as a youngster. But I had actually never played it as a professional musician in concerts. Funny enough.
Oh, wow.
It's such a famous piece, and so that was one of the sonatas I looked at and studied, and the other one being Opus 109, which I recently played for the first times as well. So I actually the pandemic period made me study a bit more Beethoven than I had planned to do, because I hadn't actually planned to do any Beethoven in the. It was sort of an either or situation. Either I really go for it, or I let it go and do Beethoven later on. And I got to do some Beethoven, so I'm happy to have gotten into the Pathetique, which is of course an extraordinary piece, written when he was about 30 and making his breakthrough in Vienna.
Yeah, it's one of those pieces that everybody knows, but it doesn't take away its freshness and its uniqueness, and so it's great to hear it played well, and not just I remember fiddling through it as a as a kid too, and it just doesn't it's wonderful to hear it performed the way that you do. I should mention that we happen to have the manuscript of Opus 109 at the Library of Congress.
Okay.
So next time you're there, please drop by. But it is actually digitized and available online as well.
Right. Well, I'd love to see it, physically. I mean, that would be really wonderful. And well, I mean, the Pathetique Sonata is, it's also one of these pieces which, I mean, it's still sort of early period for Beethoven, but he's marking something new with this. It's the first sonata. He begins with a slow introduction, and you just feel with his first chords that this is serious business. This is something of a statement, and of course that introduction suddenly bursts into a very dramatic, virtuosic movement where all kinds of crazy experiments going on, and with these tremolos in the bass of the piano, creating a sort of murmur and a lot of tension. And for instance, he's this business of crossing hands, which he's doing so often in that moment, which is I mean, he must have also thought that it was a kind of show off effect, and
Sure,
that
sure.
it doesn't really occur much. I mean, you find it in Bach's Goldberg variations, but apart from that, I mean, it wasn't really used much at the time, and so he's really going out there with new things in this piece. And then, of course, you have this really memorable and so beautiful second movement that you think. I mean, some people say that Beethoven was not the greatest writing tunes, but you just hear that and you think this is really memorable. It's something that goes straight to your heart, and it's extraordinary. And then the last moment is more classical in a way. I'm thinking of it more as a greeting to Mozart. This rondo, so it has you know it has a lot of different faces. This piece.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I think it's one of the first of those early pieces that shows the orchestrational variability in his piano writing uh, that is so phenomenal. It becomes a part of of his writing overall for the piano as it keeps going. So thank you for programming it. We're going to enjoy that as the opener. Um, just to look at the next pieces that are on the program. Um, well, first of all, I should say that over the course of your career, you've exhibited a particular emphasis on the music of composers known in part, at least, for their musical nationalism. Not meaning that in a negative way, but just in terms of an association with a particular country. And you always seem to present this music with absolute conviction, regardless of what the origin is of the country. And I'm wondering if you're particularly drawn to the music of composers who incorporate elements or highlight those types of um, you know dance components and things like that. As is that something that you're particularly attracted to?
I don't know. I mean, I'm fascinated by these different flavors of, and there has been, it's led to some really wonderful music that composers have picked up, their country's folk music. And that, I mean, that goes back to Beethoven as well. I mean, you think of Beethoven's late pieces, and they're full of, it's a mixture of this very spiritual world and then very folky German dances and whatever. And I think there's a lot of storytelling in that world. And I guess I often, yeah, I'm quite drawn to that. And in this program, certainly also with both Grieg and Dvorak, has that element, um, dancing element, and the storytelling and flavor of those nations' folk music and folk backgrounds.
One of the I particularly admire your repertoire choices across. I mean, I've come to know it more just through your discography, but
Right.
that you don't always just include. So, I mean, you have recorded all the lyric pieces of Greek, but you also include Norwegian dances, Norwegian uh, uh, folk tunes, and things like folk songs, and also by composers that Grieg clearly influenced down the road. And
Right.
so, yeah, and so it's just I love that about your range of music that you've been able to bring to light some of these pieces that um, while we may the average concert goer may know the lyric pieces, they may not know these other pieces that are almost just as exciting and interesting.
I think, I mean, playing the piano, there is such a wealth of pieces out there and repertoire and wonderful things that we so rarely hear, because I mean, almost all of the great composers have written for this instrument. And so it becomes a choice. And of course, I want to play the great Beethoven sonatas and Chopin, Schumann, and so on. But I think also, being Norwegian and having grown up with that music, I'm naturally going to maybe feel closer to that than Spanish piano music, or American for that matter. And I'm not saying that, I'm absolutely not saying that the Norwegians are the only ones that can understand Greek's music, or the Hungarians the only ones who can understand Bartok's music and so on. I don't believe in that at all. You can do it with passion. But of course, this is music that I've played a lot, and it's been around me, like Beethoven's music, and I feel very confident and very familiar with Beethoven's language, and I do it with Grieg because I've played them since I was 5 6 years old, and some of these other Norwegian composers as well. And so I've sometimes tried to make recording projects and concert projects with including this flavor from my part of the world, I guess, and I appreciate when others are doing that as well. It's the world has become so small in a way. I mean, it's such a global environment, but it's wonderful that there's still pieces and differences of nations and different flavors that we can enjoy. And yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. You've chosen four pieces from Opus 54, the Opus 54 lyric pieces for the Grieg, and one of the things that comes to mind is that I can just imagine, say, Rachmaninoff listening to the Nocturno and having that kind of seep into his own, influencing him as a composer and his own way of writing. There's something about it that, especially as he was developing, I think this was the early 1890s when this was composed. That this is, I could see that becoming a part of what influenced him, and it led to his further development. And I'm
even
wondering if,
like early Debussy, maybe,
oh, sure,
there's something very French about it. Also, that middle section and very hazy and impressionistic, and yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
no, absolutely. And I guess I'm wondering, just with your experience with Norwegian music in particular, how great of influence did Grieg's music have on those subsequent generations? Or was it something that people felt like they had to augment or get away from? Or what's the general response that you have?
Well, I mean,
And
Norway.
that's kind of a broad question for
Yeah, no, but I mean, Norway is a small country, and with a figure like Grieg, and Grieg had great success in his lifetime, and Norway became independent. I mean, we were a colony under Sweden, and before that under Denmark, and it became independent in 1905, 2 years before Grieg died, and Grieg was also part of that movement, and he became such a symbol of our nation, and also using the Norwegian folk music, and then so it's such a great influence, and um, was inspiring, of course, to the next couple of generation of composers. But I mean, it might have been also difficult to free oneself from that idiom, and you see very often then these composers trying to write also miniatures like Grieg, and with the same sort of use of folk music and trying to find that special flavor. But it took a while before they managed to free themselves from this very influential figure, and so maybe Norway was rather late in, except a few exceptions, like a composer like Fatin Wahlen, who just went completely his own way, and went to Berlin and studied Schoenberg's techniques and so on. But the Norwegian composers were a little bit late in getting influenced by these new languages that happened in Central Europe. It took a while, but I mean, he was, he was very influential and inspirational as well. And you find some good music, and some composers that really went even deeper into the folk music. And I mean, one could argue that Grieg uses the folk music and combines it in a very classical way with his German training. And somebody like Geert Tveit, who is a very interesting composer, who collected thousands of folk tunes in the same way that Bartok did it in Hungary. I mean, he thought that Grieg's handling of the folk music wasn't serious at all, and so but yeah, it's interesting how the composers have been battling with the influence of Grieg in this country.
I remember you included some of his music on, is it the Long Long Winter's Night, or the recording from a while back? But I remember enjoying it very much. It was very
Thank you.
beautiful. Um, yeah, no. you know, looking at not that they're a pair at all, but looking at the Dvorak pieces that you have on there on this program as well from Opus 85. Um, I just remember when I was a kid, I didn't realize that Dvorak had written much solo piano music, and I was awakened to that fact really from a recording that I remember. It was called Czech Miniature Masterpieces, and I think it was Antonin Kubelik was the pianist. This is a long time ago. I think it was in the early 90s or something. But on that recording, it was mostly things like Suk and other composers like that. But it had one piece from the Opus 85, which was the At the Old Castle. Um, and I remember it being, it struck me as like suddenly this is a fully formed, very unique, absolutely pianistic work that from a composer that I thought was not a composer of piano. And so I'm wondering if that's been your experience at all with Dvorak,
Yeah, I mean,
or why don't people play his music?
yeah, it's a very interesting case. And the difference, of course, with Grieg and Dvorak is that Grieg was a pianist and primarily wrote piano
Yeah,
music and songs, also some orchestral music, but piano was his instrument. With Dvorak, he's composing in all kinds of genres. I mean, from opera, church music, lots of symphonic music, chamber music, wonderful things. Um, but he has also written piano music, which has a very strange reputation, coming from the fact that Dvorak himself wasn't the pianist, and it's sometimes like it's awkward to play. It's clear that it's here and there that it's not written from a composer pianists. But that's certainly not all the time. And he also writes sometimes really wonderfully colorful for the piano. And for me, this Opus 85, the Poetic Pictures, is the one exception, the one masterpiece. And it's written, sort of prime time. Dvorak is writing the Eighth Symphony the same year, the Requiem the year after. He has just written his wonderful popular piano quintet. I mean, it's just bursting with invention, melodic, harmonic, the characterization, and he writes this 60 minutes. I'm doing extracts today, but in this program, but 60-minute cycles, 13 pieces. Um, really ambitious, and he writes to a friend that I've tried to be a poet a la Schumann, and I hope somebody would be brave enough to play all of them together, because that's how they are, meant or conceived. Um, and he said, but of course nobody will have the courage to do that. And at that time, they usually would just pick. They would rarely play a whole cycle. Even the Schumann cycles would be picked here and there, selection. But I've played this now quite a few times as a cycle, and I will do so also in the next couple of years. And it's a wonderful, wonderful journey. And it feels, when you finished with it, like it belongs together. Though there are 13 different character pieces, and there are Czech dances, Furiant, Bacchanal, really virtuosic things, um, very some very serious pieces at the hero's grave, and at the holy mountain, and other pieces called a joke, and I think I'm very lighthearted. So it's like a diary, and with but so full of wonderful things. I've grown to love this music so much, and I simply cannot understand that it's not played. For me, it's the great forgotten 19th century piano cycle, basically.
and you've said that you've just recorded it recently.
I recorded it in April, and I think the CD will be out next year. And so looking forward to present that, and also to play this much more in concert.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You know, I love that you're an advocate for these lesser known works, as well as that. I mean, you play all of these, all the Chopin sonatas, all the Rachmaninoff, everything so well. But I love that you also are an advocate for these lesser known works. And I guess a question I have for you is how do you discover all these? Do you spend a lot of time sight reading? Is
Uh,
this part of your background growing up?
well, curiously enough, when I was little, my parents had an LP of with these pieces. My father had bought a bunch of LPs in London on a trip, rather randomly, I think, and there was a recording of this by the Czech pianist Radoslav Kvapil. And I remember I listened to these pieces when I was young, and I played, and I got told of the music, and I played one of them in a youth competition when I was 12 or so. And so I've sort of vaguely known about them, and I now and then I've looked at them and thought, oh, it's actually really great. Maybe I should do more of them. And I did a group like 10 years ago, 5 or 6, and then a couple of years ago, I thought, let me look again at the whole cycle, because there were a couple of pieces that I thought were thorny and difficult to handle, and I decided to throw myself at it and really do study the whole thing, and it became also my COVID period project now, because I had suddenly more time to do it, and so happy to do it, and like you say, I mean, uh, the most wonderful thing is to always play music that you believe in, whether it's famous or not. But it sometimes adds an extra value for me if I can present such wonderful music by. I mean, here we even have a very well-known composer, but
Right.
just of some reason the piano music is left out. It's sort of forgotten, and to present that, and people don't know it and are delighted and hear it maybe for the first time. That's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing it. We really appreciate having it on there. It's very exciting to be able to present it for people.
Thank you.
Um, I just have an aside kind of question that just occurred to me with respect to Grieg's music. Have you performed any of his song transcriptions, or is that
Very
something that's of interest?
one or two I've done, but it's funny you mentioned Greek songs, because I just did a recording a couple of weeks ago, of Greek songs
Oh, fantastic!
with the great dramatic soprano Lisa Davidson, who have just made such a breakthrough all over, and it's just a really wonderful singer and musician, and she asked me a couple of years ago whether I would consider doing this with her, and I've done so with great pleasure. And we will have concerts coming up in January in different places in Europe, and hopefully later in the States as well. And that's a whole Grieg recording with only songs
Wonderful.
of Grieg. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I mean, I think that those are underperformed, and they're really beautiful.
Well,
Just
I think
really
that's so much because of the language. Of
true.
course, there are a lot sung in Norway by Norwegian singers, but most of them are in Norwegian. I mean, there are a few wonderful songs in German as well, but because of the language, it's sort of doesn't get done much, and I think it's a shame. And actually, when you look at Grieg's time, I mean, he put a lot of effort into making sure that the German translation was very good and these kind of things. I mean, I don't think he was Puritan in the way thinking that it has to be Norwegian. They could be sung in German, or maybe also in English. And I think it's just a shame that these songs are not being done. I mean, somehow I think it's his greatest music. Really, he gets so inspired by the poems, and there's a freedom in his language sometimes, like in this great cycle Haugtussa. I just think it's extremely inspired. Some of his absolute greatest pieces.
Well, I look forward to that very much. That's very exciting to hear about that. One other thing I wanted to mention about some of your recent recordings, and I was hoping maybe you could say a few words about it, is that you've also done some advocacy for new music, and you've done you in 2020 you had two recordings come out that are fantastic of Sorensen and I know I'll mispronounce Voslep or
Yeah,
uh,
Boschleb.
Yeah, they're wonderful, and I just is performing contemporary music, is that something that is something that you do more often, or is it just like occasional thing, or what? Could you say a few things about that?
Well, I have to say, maybe unfortunately, it's been more of an occasional thing. The last 10 years for me, uh, I've that's when got a family, and it became I had to reduce certain things in life,
Sure.
and I've played a little less chamber music, a little less contemporary music, and so on. I'd love to come a little more back to it now. I mean, with composers that I really believe are special, and but I was very happy to do these two recordings, both of these concertos written for me. Um, you mentioned that recording, Long Long Winter Nights, which I made many years ago, and there's a composer on there, Harald Severud,
Mm.
who was a great figure when I moved to Bergen in the mid '80s. He lived here and he was 90 something, and I played for him. And he's the father of Mr. Voslev. Um,
Oh,
and so there's there are two great composers in that family.
oh wow.
And Mr. Voslev is about 75 today, and so I've been very happy to play both of these great persons' music. And Ben Sørensen is possibly the contemporary composer I've worked most with, and he wrote uh, several pieces for me, and among them this wonderful second piano concerto, La Mattina, which is with
Mhm.
chamber orchestra, and I recorded with the Norwegian Chamber Orchestra.
Oh, well, it's just another aspect of your wide-ranging repertoire. I really enjoyed them. Um, I think maybe the last thing I might ask you, and then of course you can add anything you'd like, but maybe coming back to a bit more traditional repertoire, you also have interesting projects that you've been working on, like the Mozart Momentum project, and maybe you could say a few words about that.
Absolutely, I'm in the middle of also preparing um, the second part of it, because this became a very special moment in this very closed period that we went through. Um, I mean, it had such a difficult birth. This project with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra, and tour after tour got cancelled because of the situation we were in. But in November of last year, there was a pocket of time when you could actually do something. We thought we were able to to do a small tour in Germany, but then Germany closed. But not entirely. We were able to get to the Philharmonie in Berlin and record together. Um, the first part of the Mozart Momentum project, which is it consists of 2 years in Mozart's life. The first being 1785, and now this November we will be on a longer tour and record the second part, which is pieces from 1786. Um, and the reason for calling it Mozart Momentum is because I and the orchestra think that there's something very special happening in Mozart's music in this time. I mean, there are wonderful years with all kinds of great music being written, the March of Figaro and other things, but especially in the genre of piano concerto, there is something happening there with the D minor number 20, where for the first time he's separating more the solos from the orchestra. It has especially to do with the first movement, when after the introduction of the orchestra, which is full of restless music and very dramatic, the soloist comes in with enters with music of a very lonely voice from far apart from the orchestra. And that is revolutionary. That has never happened in a concerto before, because the soloist always used to elaborate on the music you had heard in the introduction from the orchestra. Um, so he must have thought, "Oh, I'll do something completely different," and you see it in his next concertos that he follows up on that. And when you then look at somebody like Beethoven, he just loved this idea, and then he separates the more and more. And when he gets to the fourth concerto, he lets the piano start instead of the orchestra, and so it's everything upside
Right.
down. Um, but I mean, it really happens here. Mozart plants a new seed, and also it creates a different psychological drama in this genre of the piano concerto. It's the soloist is not so much part of the ensemble anymore, but it's the individual. And this is also the beginning of what one could maybe call this heroic piano concerto from the 19th century. I mean, thinking of all these great wonderful famous pieces: Schumann, Brahms, Chopin, Liszt, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, Grieg, and so on, where there's so often a sort of heroic role as a soloist. And I think it starts here with Mozart. It's a pivotal time in the genre of piano concerto. Thereby the Mozart momentum, as we call it, the project. And we're doing then another recording now, and we're doing several big tours, and hopefully at some stage also coming to the States with this project.
Absolutely. Another thing I enjoy about it is that you also include, in addition to the piano concerti, you have like the Fantasia, a G minor piano quartet, um, things like that to cover that range beyond just that piano concerto in the idiom.
Yeah, I forgot to say
Which is
that
really,
we didn't only want it to be about piano concertos, but to show different sides of what Mozart was doing with pieces with piano in them, and chamber music, and also in the 1786 this wonderful concert aria Ch'io mi scordi di te for pieces soprano and piano and orchestra, which we will be recording with Christiane Karg, the German soprano. So we try to show different music from these 2 years.
well, this is wonderful and exciting, and I'm so pleased that you were available to speak with me today about these projects and about the program that we're presenting. So I just want to thank you so much again for joining us, and I hope that all of these projects keep going smoothly without any further interruptions and whatnot. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure talking with you, and I look forward to my next visit at Library of Congress. Really, I hope it's soon.
Oh, absolutely. You're welcome anytime.